This is Impact with Don Wenner.
Hey everyone, Don Wenner here, founder and CEO of DLP Capital and the host of the Impact Podcast. Today, we have a very special guest, Brad Stulberg, on the show. Brad is an author of books like The Passion Paradox. His books have sold over 250,000 copies, making him a New York Times bestseller. In his coaching practice, Brad works with executives, entrepreneurs, physicians, and athletes. Additionally, he is the co-creator of The Growth Equation, an online platform dedicated to defining and attaining a more fulfilling and sustainable kind of success. The key takeaways of this episode are: number one, how to sustain an organization's performance over time. Number two, why being purpose-driven and empowering team members to grow will lead to scaling success. Number three, self-acceptance and self-development are not mutually exclusive. And number four, grit is such an important component of growth when it is paired with fit. So let's go ahead and get into my conversation with Brad Stulberg. All right, so Don Wenner here with Brad Stulberg. Super excited to have you today, Brad. Welcome.
Don, it's so good to be talking with you again.
It is, yeah. I like they said that again. So I had the pleasure of, I'm a big fan of yours, Brad, as I think you already know. I've read, not only have I read both of your very famous best-selling books, Passion Paradox and Peak Performance, multiple times. I've actually had our group at DLP called Driven for Greatness, which are about 200 of our team members have read both of your books as well. And we had the pleasure last year of having Brad come talk to DLP and share some of his thoughts on his book, his most recent book at the time, Passion Paradox. And I get to have Brad also come speak at our upcoming event in Asheville, North Carolina, where both Brad and I, we should have just done this face-to-face. We would have realized we're both here in Asheville right now, but can't wait for that as well. But today we're going to dig in a bit on a number of topics related to taking action in order to grow a business and grow yourself individually. And I was reading through some of the commentary on your upcoming book, which I can't wait for you to talk about and share with us. And you said something here that I wanted to kind of kick off with. You said an area of business research called organizational ecology says that organizations that are forward-thinking, reflective, and challenge themselves to grow tend to survive and sustain their performance over time. I'd love just for you to kind of explain that a little bit more. What do you mean by that? What does the research tell you?
Sure. So the fields of organizational ecology takes the lens of natural ecology and applies it to organizations. And if you think about what makes a species really gritty and sustainable and persistent over time, it's that species' ability to adapt to its environment. So if the environment changes in a drastic way and the species doesn't adapt, it gets selected out, it dies. If the environment changes in a drastic way and the species adapts 150%, well, it's no longer what it was. It's not a dinosaur anymore. Now it's a human. Species that are really able to sustain their true form, they're very good at a genetic level, again, out in the wild, at knowing what makes them them, and then being willing to adapt on everything else. And that same framework can be applied to organizations. The environment around organizations is constantly changing. Organizations that don't adapt, that are rigid, they become blockbuster video. They get selected out. Organizations that adapt completely become the tech startup that no one's really sure what they do because they're not really sure what they do. The organizations that have a lot of staying power, they stay true to their core values, to their essence, and then they're extremely flexible on everything else.
Well, I like that. So
things are the same way, like an individual level, if you think about it too.
So, as you described that, I mean, it sounds, pretty simple, but obviously is quite difficult. Why do so many organizations struggle to stay true to their core values and who they are, but flexible, as you said, to everything else? And as you said, many individuals have that same challenge. Why do you think that is?
Well, let's start with the core values side of things. I think that often organizations have core values that exist on a poster on the wall, but that's it. And if your people at your organization, if your leadership team at your organization can't speak to those core values in an intimate way, what do they really mean? What do they stand for? Then they're not very effective. So getting from a core value like trust or service or quality or authenticity down to here's how we define it at our organization, down to here's how we show up and practice it day to day. Once you're at that level and that's hardwired into the system, then everybody knows what those core values are. They become real. They become a way of doing things, a part of the culture. You take them off the website, you take them off the poster on the wall. Now, the challenge with flexibility and change, this is nothing new. From the beginning of time, we don't like change. The body doesn't like change. Organizations don't like change. It's really, really challenging. And I think that oftentimes what happens is we tend to resist the change around us. And sometimes we go as far as to engage in magical thinking, to deny that it's really happening, to paint an overly rosy view of the environment. And the reason that we do this is because in the short term, it feels good. But in the long term, we're just kicking the can down the road. So I think it's about marrying these two qualities of knowing your core values, knowing who you are, knowing what the organization is. These are the hills that we will die on. And then at the same time, when the environment changes, having the courage to accept things are changing and we have to accept what's happening, see clearly, and apply our core values to a new context.
I love that. So we've come through COVID here over this past year and a half now. How have you seen organizations differentiate themselves through this environment? How have you seen this kind of thinking play out through this past year and a half?
Yeah, so it's a good question, and it's still, to me, unfolding. It's hard to say who's going to end up where and what traits or qualities will have been really successful versus what not, because we're still so fresh in this. I think I can speak to a leadership standpoint, so to leaders at organizations, kind of what's been associated with resilience and persistence versus not. And I think the main thing is a letting go of what you had planned for, letting go of what you wished would happen, letting go of what you wanted to happen, and really being present and leading in the moment and saying, this is what's happening right now. Here's how we're going to move forward, and being willing to show up day in and day out with that kind of beginner's mindset. Because COVID it hasn't just been this linear crisis. There have been periods where we thought we were out of it, and some states were reopening and then closing, and then vaccines are coming and then they're delayed, and then travel's open and then travel's closed. So in some ways, it's almost been more challenging because it's been this kind of oscillating crisis versus just a linear crisis. So the ability to have a plan but not marry it, and then show up day to day and try to make decisions in the moment, that's been huge. And then the second thing, I think, from a people perspective is just kindness. I mean, everybody has experienced challenges throughout COVID in their own unique ways, some far greater than others. And if your number one asset as an organization is your people, and your people are all going through this, not just professionally, but personally, I think big-hearted leaders and big-hearted organizations, when we look back over the long term, those will be the ones that come out of this best.
Yeah, I love that. And so I'm going to take that in a couple of paths here. And one of our core values is living fully. And I believe it's the responsibility of leaders and organizations to accept that it's our responsibility to help our people, live fully. And we consider living fully as succeeding in the 8 F's of life, which we've defined as faith, family, friends, freedom, fun, fulfillment, finance, and fitness. And so helping our people not only be great here at DLP or great in your organization, but helping them be great in life and happy and fulfilled, I believe, is our responsibility as leaders. You talk a lot about and I think throughout your books and the value of passion, and I'm excited to hear a little bit more what I've been reading about your upcoming book. But how do you think about the concept of organizations helping people do what so many people struggle to do, and be happy and live a full life, and especially through environments like COVID, like you just said, all the challenges that brought for all of us?
This is such a big, meaty question. Where to start? The first thing I'll say is something that's always impressed me about you guys is, even when you first reached out to me, you had this book club, and I'm thinking, like, what's a lending company gonna, why is there a book club? And just the way that you invest in developing whole people, it's clear that it's not just talk, it's a value that you actually practice. And I think that it takes a certain kind of leadership in any organization to say, hey, here's our primary goal: to be a good bank, to be a good hospital, to be a good accounting firm, to be a good law firm. And our secondary goal is, as a leadership team, we've got hundreds, in some case thousands of people that we can impact, and we can have an impact on their lives. And even if the business 50 years from now goes bankrupt and fails, well, you know how many employees came through that pipeline that we had a positive impact on and we helped shape? So it's a real broad way of thinking of leadership. I think another really positive element of it is you can get into an industry that on its face can feel kind of bland. So accounting is not, it's hard to go from being an accountant to saying like you have like this massive purpose and meaning in the world. But if you're a big accounting firm and you've got a program for your people that really focuses on the full person and shapes them, well, then guess what? You do show up to work as a leader with a lot of purpose. Now, to get a little bit philosophical here, I am torn, because I think in an ideal world, the local community would do this. So the church, the synagogue, the mosque, the sangha, the community center, to an extent like the municipality, the parks and rec, and work would be a place that people go and work, and then they have really strong community. Now, that is a too simplistic model. It's not going to happen. That ship has sailed long ago, because big organizations are now so interwoven in their community. We know that dogmatic religion memberships have declined over the last 20 years. So I think a lot of people are, especially with hybrid work, where people are going into the office only part-time, they're maybe not engaging in the community the same. Humans have always craved this sense of belonging and growth. And I think the traditional places that they found it are no longer on offer in the same way. So a lot of progressive organizations have stepped up to try to fill that gap. The challenge here is that, how do you stay a workplace and not become like a big group therapy session? And that's really hard. I mean, that is a challenge that a lot of organizations have, is, hey, we want people to be vulnerable. We want to lead with a big heart, and we're still a business that has to be profitable to succeed. And I think that is kind of the price that you pay for wading into those waters of really trying to help people.
Yeah, well said. And
it comes off kind of negative. It's just a part of the package.
It is, yeah. And so we say one of the crises we're really focused on here at DLP is we call the happiness crisis. And 50% of Americans, according to a number of studies, are suffering with some form of mental illness, and the number one issue is depression, and really at the core of why people are unhappy and depressed is this lack of connection. And Dale Carnegie in his great book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, says, the number one human desire is that of importance, and most people historically have gained a certain component of that importance and significance from their work and the pride they get from their work, and then they've had those strong communities, like you said, in their on a local level in their church, and different components of involvement with organizations in their local community. And that's certainly COVID's accelerated that, but that's declined in a number of ways. Many people have tried to replace that through social media, which has only continued to create some more challenges and lack of connection and feelings of inadequacy and so forth for many. So as you see this kind of environment, let's say those stats, nobody has exact stats, but are true. 30%, 40% of people are struggling with some form of depression. Just many people today just simply aren't happy. What do you see as what can we as leaders of organizations do to make an impact to this? What do you think the solutions or things that we can do to kind of change this course in this direction that we're moving in as a society today?
Yeah, I think the first thing is to center around the human. So really think about what is best for humans, what is best for people, not necessarily just what's best for the organization. I think something else is to try to create a real sense of belonging that is not just related to someone's performance. So I think a huge issue with the, I'll just call it the current ethos or the current culture, is that quote unquote wellness or quote unquote happiness has become this enormous consumer driven industry where you have to buy X to get well, or you have to achieve Y to be happy. And you get on this roller coaster, and we know from scientific research, they call it hedonic adaptation, like it's never enough. This is a huge theme of my forthcoming book, The Practice of Groundedness, is that if you strive without a stable foundation, it's never enough. You're fulfilled for a day or two, and then you need more and more and more. And it used to be that this was really just around like consumer products and goods, but now it's become around well-being. Like there's the whole quote unquote wellness industry or happiness. And I think that it is realizing that true wellness, true happiness is not something outside of yourself. It's something that you find within yourself and within communities. So the more that you can create a sense of belonging and the more that you can help people realize that, hey, you are enough right now. That doesn't mean that you can't get better, but you have to start by being enough. The great humanistic psychologist Carl Rogers said that the great paradox of change is only when I accept myself, then I can change. And I think that unfortunately, we tend to think of self-acceptance and change or discipline as polar opposites, when in fact, they're complementary. The best athletes that I work with, the best entrepreneurs, the best executives, they learn to accept themselves and all their insecurities and be who they are. And that's what allows them to take productive risks and grow. But I'd almost flip the question on you. I know that you're supposed to be interviewing me, but it's really impressive. Like you don't have too many investment firms that put this kind of interest into people. So what led you and your team to do this? And how did this become such a core part of who you are? When a run-of-the-mill investment firm, from my understanding, is we make money and we serve our clients. And you all seem to be about so much more than that.
Yeah, thank you, Brad. And so for me, it started with the fundamental belief in it's the right thing to do, and understanding that my first job as the CEO and owner of an organization is to help be an evangelist, to connect people to the Lord is my first responsibility and opportunity I have. And when you view things through a faith-based mindset, I understand that the opportunity and the blessing of being able to employ, provide, income and opportunity and significance to a growing number of people. We're at 450 today, is a great, incredible opportunity. And so first, it's understanding that it's what is right to do, and it feels like it's our responsibility to do. But then second, the great thing about it, like so many things, like our whole concept around impact investing you were talking about earlier, is it doesn't have to be a sacrifice. So it doesn't have to be a sacrifice of saying, hey, I'm going to do what's good and help people and cross into the kind of messiness of the human side, in really investing in our people. But being able to understand that that's not a sacrifice of profits to do that, that if you do that well and you invest in your people and building a great culture and empowering your people, helping them to be fulfilled, helping them to be successful in all aspects of life, understanding that if they're a better father, a better mother, a better husband, a better sister, they're going to be better in their work as well. Maybe not if you're measuring things over a day or a week or a month, but over long periods of time. They're going to be more engaged, better, more productive people, and evangelists to helping us add more great people to our organization and clients and so forth as well. So it's not I guess the natural way that. Say it again.
It's a long view that you take.
Yeah, it's definitely a very, very long view, and it's now at year 15, it's certainly paying some tremendous dividends, but it's certainly harder, and it certainly brings some, as you kind of said earlier, some messiness as well. But I think looking at doing simple things that you talked about earlier, of launching our book club called Driven for Greatness, and seeing the effect that somebody who's a frontline construction worker or working in maintenance, the value and change that they have, not just in their performance at work, but hearing the story at a company picnic from their wife or their children of how they've changed and how much better their lives are and so forth. It's incredibly rewarding, and it empowers you to keep down the path, even on some days when you just want people to focus and get their work done but keeping, and it's easy to say, hey, let's cut out these 4 hours focused on living fully that we planned and all this time on all this stuff outside of work, or let's let's cancel that service day where we're all going to go out there and do some good in the community because we got a lot of work to do and we got a lot of priorities. It's easy to kind of make those daily sacrifices that make sense on a short term, but as you said, on a long term basis, pays tremendous dividends on this earth and hopefully after our time here as well.
Yeah, I just love that. So my own like spiritual background is mainly in Buddhism, and you could replace when you say the Lord with like what I would say like is love or loving awareness. And all these traditions point to the same thing. And earlier I mentioned big-hearted leadership, but it's really just realizing that hey, like we are these essential humans, and we're interacting with each other, and the more that we can bring our presence and love to those interactions, the better. And then the second, less kumbaya thing is all the research shows that like in the short term, if you play the short game, you're really successful. But in the long term, if you play the long game, you're really successful. So some of this is just really taking a long view and striving towards mastery and realizing that, hey, we're going to make compounding gains, not just in our financial investments, but in our people. And by being consistent and doing the right things, even if it's hard, even if sometimes it's boring, exhausting, whatever gritty adjective you come up with, day in and day out, that really compounds. You create a great workforce, you create good people for their communities, and you can look in the mirror and feel really good about yourself. But it's hard. I mean, I know that you know it. Like there are highs and lows, and the closer that you get to people and the more that you care, the harder it is, because the things that you care deeply about are the things that break your heart.
Well said. And you've hit a word quite a few times that I want to pivot in from that conversation. What I think is a great tie-in is grit, which is another one of our core values. And Angela Duckworth defines it as passion and perseverance towards long-term goals, and that's kind of what you've been talking about there, of having long-term goals you're working towards versus being short-sighted. And I'd love to see how you get your perspective here on how you think about grit, and I often define grit as what separates the most successful people in the world from everybody else. And I think grit can be learned and improved upon, and I know it ties a lot into what your I think your best book today. I have no doubt your upcoming book we're going to talk about in a minute or two will take the bar up even higher. But in Passion Paradox, you talk about the two types of passion and how passion plays in with grit. Yeah. So just love your take here.
Yeah. So my thinking on this has changed a little bit, and this is a part of the practice of groundedness, which is the next book. So I think that grit is really important after you have fit. So good fit leads to grit. And what do I mean by that? If you are doing an activity that you love and you find something that you love, then that's when you apply grit and you're really persistent. The issue with grit, and this, I wouldn't have said this 3 years ago, is that grit on its own can sometimes lead people to stick around things too long when they would be better served to quit. So the example that I like to give is, if you look at my past as a writer, I have been rejected from journalism schools. I've had essays turned down. I've had book proposals turned down. You would look at me and be like, this guy is a gritty person. But I would say, no, I'm a gritty writer, because you look at me in math and science and I like failed the quiz. I'm like, oh, guess I'm never going to take not pre-med anymore. So it's not so much that I'm a gritty being in general. It's that I have found certain things that I enjoy doing, but I want to apply myself towards. And in those things, I'm really gritty. So I guess the nuance around this is, I think it's almost like, first you have to find fit. And the best way to find fit is often a period of sampling. So trying lots of things, not being scared to mess up, being okay with quitting if something just doesn't feel right. But then once you're in that relationship, and I use that metaphorically, but also it could be in a relationship with a person, and it is clicking, well, that's when grit is so important, because eventually it's going to stop clicking. And then you want to go from dabbling in all these things to actually getting on the path of mastery. So it's almost like, have a sampling period, find something or a few things that you really love. And then once you're in them, you better buckle up and get gritty, because there's going to be highs and lows. And what's going to sustain you is the ability to hold on tight. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes great sense. But I'd like to, kind of push a little bit on a couple of those thoughts and get some clarity. So, yeah. Steve Jobs is probably the most famous person on the topic of passion, right? In his statement, find something you love and you'll never work a day in your life. And And I think people can listen to what you just said there of finding fit and kind of take that interpretation, right? Like, I love basketball, but I'm at best 5'10", right? But a lot of people think, hey, pursue that with everything you have because it's what you love and so forth. But you kind of mentioned earlier that you can be in the world of accounting, which many of us consider to be very boring, but you can find a lot of passion and enjoyment out of the pursuit of the impact you can make through the skill you gain as an accountant within your organization or for your client. So where do you kind of look at it and say when do you need to kind of look? I always thought of grit as kind of the passion that's tied to grit of the pursuit of improvement, the kind of incremental gain is where.
Well, yeah, you can apply to your whole life, right?
Yeah.
And then it just becomes like, hey, at the end of the road, am I the best person that I could be? Did I mastery? I'd call that. I mean, all these words are close cousins.
Sure.
So yeah, I think there it's a great attribute. I guess what I'm saying is when it's applied to a single thing, it is a gift and it's a curse. Like all of these, very powerful, like caring. I said, caring is a gift and a curse. All these powerful topics. The gift is that it allows you to be persistent. It allows you to stay on the path. It allows you to keep going. The curse is that sometimes it blinds you to potential off ramps that could better serve you at that point. I think that as you get older, it becomes a more important quality. So I don't want my 9-year-old kid to be a super gritty athlete because that might lead to burnout by the time he or she's 16. But once you're 24 and you're already playing in the NBA or whatever, well, once you have hard times, you have to hang in there. So it's not saying that you're going to just find this magical thing and then immediately fall in love. You have to develop passion. We talked about that last time we were on the show together. It's just that you don't want to get so head down, never quit, never quit, never quit, unless you're positive that that's the thing that you should be in. So it's almost like the Goldilocks. You have to thread the needle, right? You don't want to stick around for something where you'd be better served elsewhere, but you also don't want to keep dabbling in things.
I love that. So we have a lot of entrepreneurs who listen in here, and I think entrepreneurs, which often confuse the kind of drive with say grit, and so they'll come into and start a new business or start working for a new company and have no problem working 90 hours a week, 100 hours a week, go nonstop, working on building something, creating something. And then all of a sudden, I think what happens is now you start having clients and employees, and now you start having to incrementally deal with issues and have incremental growth and improvement and kind of some of the fun of something new and creating something and changing the world and so forth. The kind of the real world of running the business then kind of kick in, and then it's very easy to then go and leave to a new job or start a new company or go chase some new shiny object. Willing to put in again 100 hours all over again and work really, really hard, but that kind of process of constantly going and chasing some new idea, and it can be within an organization, even it can even be staying in a company, but putting all your energy and effort around some project, some initiative, and then it doesn't work perfectly, you run into some issues, and then you put all your energy and effort into the new thing within the organization. So how do you kind of think about that challenge that many face of who are willing to work really hard and are driven and curious and want to learn and grow, but can't stay focused, long enough to actually get the results or rewards from all that hard work?
Well, I think that there's two things. One is to try to improve at staying focused to get the results and know yourself well enough to know that, hey, this is when I tend to check out or move on to the next thing, and just hang in there, even if it feels uncomfortable, even if it feels like a grind. The second thing in organizational life is if you have that self-awareness and you're really good at starting things and taking them to 70%, but not finishing them, that can be okay if you build a team around you, if it's great at finishing things. That's like the serial entrepreneur within an organization.
Sure.
You don't want to just be the idea person that runs from meeting to meeting with all these good ideas and none of them ever get done. And that happens too. But I think there's a level of self-awareness that says, hey, I'm really good at starting things, but sometimes I am not so great at finishing them. And then your two paths are, do you use that awareness to hang in there when it gets tough? Or do you surround yourself with finishers? In business speak, this could be the difference between like a strategy disposition and an operator. And some people are great at both, but oftentimes the greatest partnerships in organizations are someone that's really good at strategy and the thinking and the intellect and the setting the path, and then someone that's really good at, blocking and tackling, opening and closing doors. And if you compare those two things together, it's great. I do think that there is something to say for seeing hard things through that just helps develop you as a person. It doesn't have to be for the sake of doing it. They want to be meaningful goals. And there, if you've been struggling at that last 10 or 20%, I think the best thing that you can do is find coaching, friendship, mentorship, people that you really trust that can say, hey, you're close, hang in there. Or, hey, this is when you always quit, hang in there. I know you don't want to hear this, hang in there, hang in there. That get outside of yourself to help you stay on the path.
I love it. So speaking of, doing hard work, you talk about, being able to get in the zone, where you can, be doing hard work, but feel like you're hardly working. And, you talk a little bit about any tips to how people can focus on or be able to free themselves up to get in the zone more often and be in that state of zone or flow or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, for sure. So this is something that gets really tactical, which I like. So the first thing is understand your natural energy levels. So some people are truly morning people. Some people are evening people. Most people tend to be tired midday, but some people peak midday as well. And to the extent that you can, try to align the periods of deep work with your energy levels. So for instance, I'm a morning person and I have an afternoon dip and then I'm strong again, like around 3:30. So we're talking right now, it's 1:32. I'll explain. What I try to do is in the morning, I try to do my deep work. In the midday, normally my brain is just firing a million miles an hour. I love having conversations like this midday because my energy is a little bit lower, which helps me become a better listener. So like I get wiser, if that makes sense.
Yep.
And then in the afternoon, it's firing again. So not everyone has the autonomy of a writer and a coach, but to the extent you can, try to align your work to match your energy levels. And then the second thing is create distraction-free environments. So nothing prevents you from getting in a flow state or getting in the zone more than constantly refreshing your email or checking social media or texting or being worried that your phone's going to ring. Something that I've written about in all of my books is just the incredible power that our digital devices have over our attention. And it's a fool's errand to think that you're going to use willpower to ignore them. And if you can, the amount of willpower that you're exerting to do it is just exhausting. So something that I do and I encourage all my coaching clients to do is when you're setting down to do a block of deep work, we turn off our email client, not minimize it. So you see the little thing flash in the corner, truly exit out, and then cell phone, iPad in another room. If you can't do that, put it in a drawer somewhere, out of sight. That is very, very helpful.
Awesome. So one last sort of question, and I want to dig into your book, your upcoming book, and some questions there. One other question before that. So you already hit on some of this, but tell us a little bit about. I know you just said you're a morning person, and I know you're somebody who is probably as much as anybody here listening puts a lot of time and effort into how you maximize your time and your productivity and accomplish the most out of life. And you put a lot of not only personal practice into this, but a lot of learning and studying and research. So I'd love to hear, how do you go about spending your time? What does your schedule look like? And what have you found to help you? You hit on a couple of them already, but how have you found to kind of maximize what you want to get out of life?
So the biggest thing that I do that I think everyone can do is instead of trying to be perfect always and constantly failing, try to be perfect or as close to perfect as you can for just a few hours a day. And then the rest of the day, whatever happens, happens. So if I can get 2.5 hour blocks of deep work in 2 high quality meetings or conversations like this, whatever else happens during the rest of the day happens. If I check my email a million times, that's fine. Because I know that in those couple hours of deep work and couple hours of deep connection, I'm getting what I need to get done. I'm feeling really good about myself. I think a lot of people try to be perfect throughout the day and then just fail and then beat themselves up. And it becomes this cycle of failure versus trying to create a cycle of success. So don't start from perfect, start from 2 by 20 minutes a day and then go to 2 by 30, 3 by 30, and you build up more and more time when you can do deep focus work. The other thing that's really helpful for me is to think about very clear boundaries between certain kinds of work. So
Hmm.
this is when I'm writing, this is when I'm reading, this is when I'm having conversation, this is when I'm a parent, this is when I'm just staring at the wall, recharging. Different people are wired different ways. For myself, and I think a lot of people, it's almost like saying like, hey, I'm only going to eat dessert sometimes. Well, you end up eating dessert all the time. So it's easy to have some rigid boundaries that can help you stick to practicing those core values and getting what you want to get done. And then the last thing I'll say is being kind to yourself when you mess up. All kinds of research shows that when you mess up, if you're overly hard on yourself, if you beat yourself up, not only do you feel like crap, but it's harder to get going again. Whereas when you mess up, if you can be kind to yourself and say like, oh, guess I messed up, like it's hard to be a human, it's so much easier to get started again the next day, the next hour, the next minute.
Awesome. Awesome. I love it. When
Boundaries, self-compassion, and instead of trying to be perfect and failing, starting really small and building up to more and more periods of distraction-free, deep focus work. And then being okay with those hour and a half segments during the day where you might check your email a bunch of times. All right, it happens.
Awesome. Well, I think it's a perfect tie-in into your next book, which is probably, I think if you look at probably all your works, I think there's been a natural flow to kind of how you've come about your next project, your next book here, The Practice of Groundedness. I have not yet read the book. I'll say as it doesn't come out. The September 7th is the date I saw, but I read the overview and you talk about groundedness, a practice that values presence over rote productivity, accepting that progress is non-linear. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about what you've been up to in writing this most recent book and what we can expect when we get the opportunity to read it here in a few weeks.
Yeah, I'm so excited for you to be able to read it. You plural listeners, but you in particular, Don, because I think it's just going to resonate with you so much. So I realized that I wrote the books backwards in a sense. So peak performance is what you do when you're at the top of the mountain and everything's clicking. The passion paradox is how do you channel drive, motivation? How do you know when to apply grit, like we talked about, for the climb up to the top?
Yeah.
But what I hadn't written about is the foundation. So when the weather is good, everything is fine. But when there's rough weather, if you haven't invested in the foundation, the whole mountain can collapse. So the practice of groundedness is about what lays down the foundation for sustainable well-being, fulfillment, and success that can survive in all different kinds of weather. And there are 6 principles. The first principle, we talked about this a little bit earlier as well, is accept where you are to get where you want to go. The second principle, we just talked about this, be present to own your energy and attention. The third principle, we've talked about this. So I told you you'd like this book. Being patient gets you there faster. So playing the long game to get there faster. Fourth principle, embrace vulnerability to build genuine strength and confidence. The fifth principle is build deep community. So I make an argument that by practicing these 5 principles day in and day out, you create a strong foundation, both individually and organizationally, that you can build upon. And that when shit hits the fan, excuse my French, the foundation is still really strong. Another interesting thing about this book that separates it from my other books is this book merges modern science with ancient wisdom. So it's been fascinating for me to see that all the ancient wisdom traditions in all the modern psychological science, they all are pointing towards the same truths. So what Meister Eckhart and Spinoza were sermonizing years ago, what the Buddha or Lao Tzu was writing, that is like cognitive behavioral therapy today. So it was about trying to find these patterns that have not only had empirical evidence and findings behind them, but have also stood the test of time from some of the wisest men and women and land on these principles. So in addition to psychologists like Angela Duckworth and reading her research, there's also St. Augustine makes an appearance in the book. So it is a mix of both longtime spiritual figures as well as modern science to try to unearth these truths to build a solid foundation.
Awesome. Well, I love it. How do people, how will they get access to the book, and how do people get in touch with you, find you, follow you?
Yeah, thanks so much, Don. So the book comes out September 7th. You can get it wherever books are sold. You can pre-order it now. I'd love for you to do that if you feel inspired by the conversation. So Amazon, Barnes & Noble is your local bookseller. And then to learn more, the best place to go is probably just my website, which is www.bradstulberg.com.
Awesome. Pleasure, Brad. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It's been a wonderful conversation. I love what you guys do.
This has been Don Wenner on the Impact Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode. You can check out our other episodes by subscribing wherever you get your podcasts or on YouTube, or check us out online by going to impactwithdon.com. I encourage and challenge you to make an impact.